Tune this special session, Sideways, a live podcast as a lineup of activists, brand owners and authors join host Matt Barr for a frank discussion on the role that brands could and should play in activism. So I might just run through who we've got on stage. Perhaps you could give us a wave when I say your name. We have Bronwen Foster-Butler, who is Chief Marketing Officer at Finisterre. Thank you, Bronwen. Thomas Kolster, who would be our speaker. Yes, excellent. Purpose pioneer, Goodvertising. We've got Lauren MacCallum. Lauren, sorry, just give us a wave. No one knows who you are. Lauren MacCallum, founder, Big Where You Stand, and Chris Turner, CEO of B-Lab UK. Guys, take it away.
Hello, thank you. How are we doing? Everyone dressed for the warm weather then, which is good to see. So yeah, my name is Matt. I run an agency called All Conditions Media, and I run a podcast called Looking Sideways. And through that, I've been exploring conversations around purpose with brands and activism over the last few years. And that's the conversation we're going to have today. Like we've been talking about, like how can brands undertake effective activism at this time? Got this brilliant panel. So Thomas, I'm going to start with you today. So you're an author. You've written the book. You run an advertising agency called Goodvertising. You've written the book Goodvertising. The Hero Trap was your most recent book. And you've basically been at this now for the kind of coalface of this conversation for 15 years, would you say?
Are you calling out my gray hairs? Is that what's...
Maybe a little bit, yeah. So how have you seen this conversation evolve in the years you've been a proponent of this topic?
Yeah, hello everyone. I don't know how many of you feel that brands can be activists. Some hands up. How many? 4, 5, 6, a few of you feel that brands can be activists. I mean, my book Goodvertising was back in, a lot of the research was done 2010. I wrote it because I'm a Dane, as you might be able to hear in the accent. I wrote it because of a failed climate summit in Copenhagen. That got me pretty furious and asked myself the question, what can we as brands and advertisers do? At the time, I was young, pretty naive, and the big question I asked myself at that time was, if you do good for people and planet, is it going to be good for brand and bottom line? So that's sort of been my mission over the years to prove that. I kind of feel we stalled completely. Because back then, it was very easy as a brand to stick out, to differentiate on some of these issues. And you could build some amazing brands on the back of social issues, etc. Today, I kind of feel like it's chasing Pokemons. You know, people don't really know why they're doing. They just sort of, let's do it. And for me, the problem about brand activism, I feel today, is that most of the time it kind of feels a little bit like, excuse the language, public masturbation. I don't really wholeheartedly believe in most instances that brands are activists. They're lobbyists. If you look at the cases that they support, it's often in their interest. For me, true activism is different. It's self-sacrificing. It's going beyond. So I really do question this concept of brand activism in today's age.
Yeah, so you're questioning the terminology, but it is the case that brands are engaged in this conversation at the moment. You know, like as you say, 2010, when you started, I've heard you talk about the fact that like it wasn't really a conversation for companies and brands, really. It wasn't even on the radar. You know, you wouldn't even be debating the terms, would you? You know, it's just so. And I heard you speak recently and say that this is almost like the third cycle you've seen of skepticism around this. You know, there's this cycle of like brands adopting this idea that they should, whether you call it activism, whatever you call it, you know, they should engage in these topics, let's put it that way. And then there's a cycle of like consumers sort of seeing it as greenwashing, or there might be political and social conditions which change the conversation, which I know, Bron, you're going to speak about today. So how do you see it generally right now? Do you think that's where we are? Do you think we're at a point of skepticism again right now?
I mean, the second book hinted at that in the sense that it spoke about sort of the wokeness that was suddenly happening and the anti-wokeness. And so this the book came out in 2020, and I felt we were seeing already an emerging post-purpose market. Because in so many instances, I just didn't really buy into the purpose. So I asked myself, what brand have in fact created positive change in my life? And the list was very short. So in the hero trap, I said, maybe the purpose needs to be found in my purpose, in my mission, what actually really matters in my life. And so at least then I feel, hey, somebody actually made me eat healthier. Somebody actually made me live more climate friendly. So in that way, at least it somehow becomes authentic. I think the challenge today is that we've been talking so much about this stuff. We've been talking about greenwashing the last damn 15 years.
Yeah.
I think the reality of it, there's two elements to marketing, and I think we forget the latter one. There's sort of the perception, then there's performance. Have we actually seen products fundamentally change? I think the challenge is today that we live in a sustainability desert. Most people don't actually have access to real sustainable products. And I think that's the big difference. That's the big challenge right now, that we keep as advertisers talking a lot about it, but we don't innovate, we don't deliver. So unless you are affluent and you can afford a B Corp label or whatever it might be, I think the majority of people today just don't have that. Unfortunately.
Yeah. Chris, can I bring it to you? So you're the CEO of B-Lab. So could you explain briefly for people here what B-Lab actually does and what B-Lab's role is in this conversation? Maybe not.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Yes, happy to. Thanks, Matt. So can I ask who knows what a B Corp is? All right, great. So B Corps are, I think a really interesting kind of starting point for this conversation when it comes to B Corps is sometimes when we think about the work that we do, we think we have a bit of an identity crisis. Because on the one hand, B Corp is a certification. So it is a pretty rigorous assessment that B Corps do. We verify that assessment. It demonstrates the fact that that business is walking the talk, if you like, that they are kind of weaving, embedding throughout their business all the different ways in which they can have a positive impact. They're making a legal commitment to governing their business in the interests of kind of environment and society as well as in the interests of their shareholders. So there's a kind of a real sort of nuts and bolts to B Corp, which makes it, fairly sort of mechanical. However, we are also a movement. We call ourselves a movement. So we are a group of people who run B Corps, people who work for B Corps, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people around the world who fall into those categories, but also allies and people who buy from B Corps and invest in them. A movement of people who believe fundamentally that business needs to be a force for good, and that the whole purpose of business, not of each individual business, but the purpose of business existing at all, needs to be that it is benefiting everybody and being a force for good in the world. And so you've kind of got these quite sort of like jarring things alongside each other, this sort of visionary sort of, I guess, imagining of the way that business could be functioning around the world in every single case in such a way that it's solving massive challenges like the climate crisis and rising inequality, while at the same time you've got a very detailed nuts and bolts certification which businesses are having to do. So the answer to your question, I suppose, is how do we bridge that gap?
Sure.
How do we activate businesses on a case-by-case basis so that that is all adding up to more than the sum of its parts?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the answer to that question, we answer that question in as many ways as we can, and that's our job in some ways. So B-Lab UK, which I run, just in case it's not clear, is the UK charity, which is kind of growing the B Corporation movement here. And so we have a whole strategy that is essentially dedicated to answering that question, bridging that gap.
Sure. So you facilitate the conversation for brands. I interviewed somebody from B-Lab New Zealand, and they said to me that for brands, like the process is almost the point. What they learn through going through that process. You're not in Bronwen, because obviously at Finisterre, you've been through this process. But the other thing that seems to be the case, Chris, is like it's an evolving conversation, like you're saying. And you have just recently introduced these new standards for brands. And one of the interesting topics there is there seems to be a call for brands and companies who want to go through this process to engage a bit more overtly outside the company? You know, there's reference to community involvement, government action, you know, lobbying, if you like. I mean, I might be paraphrasing a little, but could you explain briefly, like, what's behind that shift in the standards for companies that want to take part in this now?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try not to take up the rest of the day on this, but so basically, we are evolving the B Corp standards, as you say. It's the biggest, most fundamental change we've ever made to the B Corp standards. So, and we're now nearly 20 years into B Corp, and we've never really changed the architecture of the standards. It's always been a little bit of a like choose your own adventure, like collect points wherever you like, and you can reach the score and become a B Corp. We're changing that, so there's now a set of minimum requirements that every single B Corp needs to fulfill, covering different impact topics. One of those impact topics is government affairs and collective action, which I'll talk about in a bit more detail. But the thinking there behind both having minimum requirements and behind introducing government affairs and collective action as an impact topic is because we're basically like, you know, we're not figuring this out anymore. We're not at the stage anymore where we're kind of like, do we think business should have purpose? You know, grow up, right? We all know that business has created enormous wealth and done enormous harm.
Sure.
And we all realize that in order to shift the dial so that we're making a kind of systemic change, every single business is contributing to good, not reducing harm, eliminating harm. Therefore, we're at a position where we can introduce these minimum requirements and say, well, we understand now that in order for that to be the case, we know that every single business needs to be measuring carbon. We know that every single business needs to be paying a fair or living wage. You know, there are things we know to be true that business has to be doing. So that's why the minimum standards now exist. On government affairs and collective action, again, I'll wrap it up. On government affairs and collective action, the thinking there is basically to say that if we're bridging this gap between individual business and then systemic impact, what we need to ensure that businesses are doing is they're starting with the business, they're thinking about all the ways in which they're having a positive impact, they're thinking about their commitments, they're thinking about their decision making, but they're also then looking beyond the business. How can we bring in different stakeholders? How can we mobilize? How can we think about our industry or sector? How can we think about place? How can we think about these different kind of groups within which we can make a positive contribution, bring other people into this wider movement. This isn't the B Corp movement, this wider movement of business being a force for good. And so that's where we're basically saying there is now a minimum requirement to say, can you mentor another business on how to kind of, you know, take action? Can you bring a group together in your industry or sector to think about challenges you might all be facing collectively and come up with solutions together? Can you be advocating or lobbying on government, on policy change and legislative change? So that's why now we have those requirements.
How much of that has been in response to some of the critiques that have been made about B Corp? Because obviously there's been a little bit of backlash over the last couple of years around the fact that it is a bit of a marketing kind of badge and that there's not a lot of substance to it. Was that part of the kind of conversation around this, or was it just a natural evolution? I mean, that, like you say, to meet the moment, as you put it, of saying, well, actually, this is a non-negotiable now for brands? Yeah,
I think it's both. So it is definitely an evolution. It's an evolution that would have happened anyway, and one that's needed. And frankly, probably one that's a little bit behind when it's needed. Like, you know, it's taken us years to develop the new standards.
Sure.
And that's because thousands and thousands of people have consulted on, you know, we've got so much input. So it's a bit that. Then it's also, I suppose, the people who have maybe been saying, you know, why is this business a B Corp? Why is this business a B Corp? I mean, on the one hand, we've never lowered the standards. We've never made it easier for businesses to come in because we want bigger businesses in or anything like that. But on the other hand, the standards need to get harder.
Sure.
And that will make it more difficult for a lot of businesses to become.
Yeah, it's an accountability aspect to this, obviously. Bronwen, you were nodding enthusiastically when I said the line about the process being the point. Could you give a little bit of an insight just from the Finisterre point of view? Because, you know, Finisterre and yourself are really strong advocates for the process, right? Could you give a bit of an insight into like how it's been, you know, reforming, constructive for Finisterre to go through this process and to be part of this community?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think You know, I get asked a lot by marketers, should I become a B Corp? Is that good for marketing? And I think if that's the question you're asking, you're missing the point. Like, the goal and the vision should be that every single business in the UK achieves B Corp standards. Like, that should be actually the bare, like, that's still even a pretty low bar. Like, if we're truly going to continue to inhabit this planet as healthy individuals who can live really vibrant, exciting lives, urgent action does need to happen.
Yeah.
So if you're approaching B Corp as a marketing initiative, you're thinking too small. Also, it's really hard. You know, I heard all that criticism around B Corp as a marketing thing, and I think it was oversimplifying just how hard it is to actually achieve. In particular, we're a retailer, we have a supply chain. It is very, very hard. And so, what was your first question?
Just the impact.
I've got perimenopause, for anyone else who's perimenopausal in the audience. Sorry, men, but like, the brain thing is real.
Just the impact that it had on the brand, really.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's like this incredible to-do list. Like, if you want to be a better business, even if you don't think you're going to achieve B Corp certification, go through it. You don't have to be a sustainability expert. B Corp will teach you. It will force you to look at every single component of your business, how you treat your suppliers, what your supply chain is, how you're shipping product around the world, what end of life is, how you're activating in the community. And it's like the perfect guidebook for being able to look yourself in the eye and know that you're a better human being and that you're making a positive contribution to the world.
Yeah. So you're the headline act on the stage at 2:45 today, and you're give me the title of, sorry, no pressure, and give me the title of your presentation.
It's Purpose in the Time of Trump, 2:45 on this stage, so.
Purpose in the time of Trump. So you're obviously making this connection overtly between, as I termed it, the socio-political landscape that we've got right now, which is also what I was getting at a little bit with you, Thomas. You know, like, it's never really been less fashionable right now, this conversation. You know, if you look at...
Yeah,
and
before it just
and what I
didn't
was really
exist.
interested in, I think I saw you speak at South by Southwest maybe, and, you know, you were basically saying, for your money, it's actually never been more important for brands to lean into this conversation. So could you explain a little bit of your thinking there?
Without giving away the punchline of my presentation later.
No spoilers, obviously.
It comes down to the intention of purpose. So if the intention of purpose is profit, then it's not purpose. It's a marketing campaign. Where the intention of purpose in the new generation and this new iteration of purpose has to be that we have a positive impact and that we do business better, like what B Corp talks about. And so if we as a business want to exist, if we want to have a supply chain that can produce cotton, if we want to have workers that can work in parts of the world where it can get extremely hot, if we want to be able to ship product around the world, if we want to have customers thriving who can access a healthy ocean, we really do need the world to be taken care of. We need action. And I think the biggest competitive advantage that any brand can have is its people. And as a B Corp certified business, but also as a purpose-led brand, we attract incredible talent because people ultimately get tired of the rat race and they actually want to feel as though they have a personal legacy that they can be proud of. So in a really hard economic environment, when purpose is completely under attack, I just think there's no better time than to, especially if you already have purpose sort of slightly within your wheelhouse, to double down on it, to lean in. People aren't not caring about it anymore, and so attract the great talent and stand out. Yeah.
I'll come to you in a minute, Thomas. I can see you're keen to jump in, but I just want to ask Lauren a couple of questions. So, Lauren, you're... Until recently, you were CEO of Protect Our Winters. Yeah. For how long?
Just under 7 years.
And it might be helpful if you explain to people who might not be familiar, like, a little bit about what that organisation is, what the work you did was.
Yeah, so I was the first member of staff, and at Protect Our Winters, we helped passionate outdoor people become effective climate advocates to achieve systemic solutions for climate change. So basically, helping the outdoor community and industry use their power and influence to influence systemic change, so at a policy and governmental level.
Just that.
Just that.
Yeah. So big goals.
Yeah, big goals.
So big goals to have a tangible impact on this conversation.
Yeah.
And you know, you use governmental. You're trying to make Big change.
Yeah, systemic change, yeah.
And as part of that, that really did involve working with a lot of brands, right?
Yeah.
So you, because I think what's obviously interesting here is, you know, Bronwen, you're coming from the brand point of view. Chris, you're obviously coming as a filter almost for this conversation for brands from the B Lab. Thomas is obviously like a bit of a, you know, commentator on this whole scenario. But you're actually someone who you could call an activist. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
And I think maybe you do call yourself an activist that has worked with brands to try and further those goals.
Yeah.
Right. Is that a fair summary of like the way that work pans out, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, I used to shy away from the term activist, but it kind of just stuck, you know. And working at a grassroots campaigning organization is gnarly. Like, I dare anybody to do it. It is some of the hardest work you will ever try and do, trying to change systems with little money, with little resource, and that's where the brands can come in. You know,
Yeah.
they can use their the customer database, they can use their skills, you know, their spaces to open up for grassroots organizing, which, in my opinion, is going to be, well, not just grassroots, but organizing, political organizing is going to be the only thing that kind of moves the needle on
Sure.
this at the scale that we need to deliver it at. Because, you know, I live in Aviemore, which is, anyone been to Aviemore, Cairngorm National Park? Yeah. So it's currently burning to the ground at the minute because of climate change. You know, I left last night in a massive plume of smoke. Like, the climate crisis is here. It's impacting our
50
communities.
degrees in Spain.
50 degrees in Spain. So,
Yeah.
like, you know, we're at a point now, and I think probably everybody in this room agrees that we need to take that tangible and effective.
Yeah.
The word here is effective.
Well, that's the key word, isn't it? And I think, you know, this is the title of the session, obviously, and I think, you know, Thomas's note of skepticism notwithstanding, like
Yeah.
we can legitimately ask you that question, I think, because you're coming at it from this position of somebody that's trying to work with these entities to provoke systemic and governmental change. So
Yeah.
what does that actually look like for you then, from your experience of working with companies and brands? Like, what does effective activism actually look like on the ground as a community organizer?
Yeah,
No,
I
one
mean,
good
it's also
one.
probably worth saying that I'm also on the board of the Cairngorm National Park, which is UK's largest national park, working with ministers on policy, so really from bottom up and top down.
Yeah.
But for me, like, working with brands, it's really about that purpose piece. If you're coming and you want to work with activists and grassroots organizations, or in this activist space, just because you want to sell more,
Yeah.
then you're going to get kicked out pretty quickly, and you're going to get called out pretty quickly. So really, to be effective, we need to move from that transactional relationship. So I give you £10,000 and I want 1 million clicks and I want this and this, you know, whatever that contract might look like. We need to move from that transactional relationship into that transformative relationship.
Yeah.
So how can you co-create solutions, quality over success?
Yeah.
So what does quality impact look like if we're going to partner with Finisterre? What does that look like? Because if we get 1 million clicks or, you know, petition sign-outs or whatever, and we've burnt everybody out, we're not resilient, we haven't done anything to broaden our movement, it's not any, you know, not any more diverse, you know, if we can't hold space together, if we can't navigate conflict, if we can't do any of that, then that's not success.
Yeah.
You know, because this is a long game now. You know, Tom's saying, like, so this is the third time. Like, we have to be resilient.
Yeah.
So parachuting in and just partnering with activists or partnering with NGOs because you want to look good is not gonna work, essentially.
Yeah. Thomas, you look like you've been wanting to jump in a couple of points. Have you got any thoughts on what Lauren's saying?
No, I think it's in relation to purpose, right? I think we can all agree purpose is important.
Yeah.
I think what I felt from my first book to my second book was that I failed the movement. I grew up on a small island in the middle of the Baltic Sea called Bornholm. I grew up with fishermen and farmers. And even if I look at our marketing and advertising community, we haven't been able to create this as an inclusive, welcoming conversation. We still sit in our little eco bubble. And I think this kind of showcases that when we talk about purpose, we end up being up on this high horse.
Yeah.
Talk about values. I absolutely hate the title of my book because Goodvertising implies a moral imperative that somehow I'm better than you. I think what we need to do as a movement is to look at the political situation in the US. You don't get me to say the devil's name. But, and maybe also think, maybe we are part of that as well. Maybe we painted a picture where we created polarization rather than actually welcoming people in. Then to the effectiveness piece, this stuff is incredibly effective, and it's effective because it's emotional. It's that simple. Advertising works because it's emotional. When we talk about other things than products, when we talk about, for example, my niece, she plays soccer.
Yeah.
She gets paid, I don't know, 100th of what a male soccer player is getting paid. So that's emotional for me.
Yeah.
So these things work in the context of being emotional. I just think we need to take a step back and maybe stop making the brands the heroes, but turning each and every one of us into the heroes of the narrative.
Yeah. Bron, is it a question that you mull over at Finisterre? Like how, just to go back to Lauren's point about the word transactional and like substance really and impact, is like how much does that figure into the work you do at Finisterre? And will something like the new standard at B Lab, will that almost like help codify that a little bit for you, do you think?
We're really excited about the new standards. We think they're great. We also think they're going to inject some danger into the new B Lab, or the new B Corp standards, so that's great. I think there's going to be some brands who aren't able to get it again, and I think that's a good thing because they should be getting harder. There should be an ever-moving goal. We take B Corp as a guide, but not always a hard and fast rule. Like,
sure.
It's certainly a North Star for our impact team, but there's also other things we do. We are a for-profit business operating in late-stage capitalism. We have to keep growing. We are a real living wage employer, and real living wage is going up, and our employees are dealing with cost of living, which means we have to grow as a business.
Yeah.
And there's a tension that exists between even to your point, like the high horse of morality around impact and being a for-profit business that inherently has an impact on the planet. So we're very realistic about that. We also talk a lot about financial sustainability. We believe the world is better that we remain in business than if we go out of business. But there are a lot of brands in the last 24 months in particular who came into in particular the apparel business, wanting to transform it, wanting to be entirely circular or work with really peculiar materials. And a lot of them are no longer with us because they didn't just actually have the bare bones of running a successful business there. And I think it's a tension. We're very aware of it. We don't shy away from it either, though.
Yeah. Do we have some questions?
We certainly do. We have 3 questions from our audience. So are you ready, team?
Yeah.
In at number 1, we have, how can charities and activist organizations navigate the space when for-profit brands are flexing their own weight in the same area? Right, so how can charities and activist organizations basically play in the same space when brands are flexing their muscles?
How can charity and environmental organizations play in the same space as brands?
As brands, when they're playing the purpose card.
When they're, okay.
Yeah.
Anyone want to take that? Chris? You want to take that, or Lauren?
Yeah,
Lauren's
yeah.
like...
I mean, I'll take the activism joke. Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of comes down. I'll just kind of succinct what I was saying. It's around find those not transactional and those kind of transformational relationships. This is all about building trust. What tools can you bring to this movement? Finisterre opened up their stores for Stop Rosebank. You know, it doesn't always have to be financial. You know, really, just ask people what they need. It's really simple, but communities and activists generally know what they need. So just ask them. You know, you don't have to kind of create solutions for them. And I'm going to tell you what isn't effective activism, and it's just basically throwing a lot of marketing budget at influencers who are active during a certain time, maybe around election. You know, they create a lot of hype and then they just disappear, which causes quite a lot of problems. So try and, you know, engage with that movement. If you don't know where to start, you know, ask me. I'll help you out. I can point you in the right direction. But you know, I think there's a lot of work that brands can do with activists and charities organizations to achieve each other's goals. We just have to come together and, like I say, co-create those impacts so that it's quality, not successful.
Great answer. Thank you very much. Sorry, second question we have for you guys. we have got. Do you feel there's a need for a more stringent judgment process for B Corp certification? The questioner says, to see companies like Patagonia alongside companies that, in their opinion, overly overproduce, it feels like it devalues the label somewhat. What are your thoughts?
Over to you, Chris.
I guess that's for me, yeah. So the question was, should there be a more stringent process? I mean, essentially the answer is yes. That's what the new standards are for. So, I mean, I won't rehash what I said before about the new standards, but essentially that is not, we have designed a whole new set of standards, minimum requirements, etc. We're also designing a whole new assurance process that sits behind those to increase the rigor by which they are evaluated and by which we actually assess the businesses and make sure that they're meeting those standards. We're making sure that's compliant with, for example, there's a whole raft of new EU legislation and regulations that are coming in to kind of govern how tight certifications need to be. So, yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff coming in to tighten it all up. And so some of that sort of, yes, to address those concerns.
Great, thank you very much. And the final question for the panel. What is B Lab's role in facilitating some of these industry groups to connect with subject matter experts and other stakeholders in collective action?
I mean, I can start on that in terms of how we're thinking about it, but I'd love to hear sort of thoughts on it as well. So basically, I mean, B Lab, as I said, we're a relatively small charity, so we're sort of like with now a community in the UK of over 2,500 B Corps. It's the biggest community of B Corps in the world, so the UK overtook US and Canada at the beginning of the year. So it is brilliant that we've got that incredible community of certified B Corps in the UK. But it's also a lot, right? It's a lot to think about. Well, how do we provide a platform where B Corps can self-organize, can convene around things? They can do that on an industry and sector basis. They can do it on a regional and place-based basis. So we're in the process of redesigning all of that. What we've done this year is we've lent quite heavily into the place-based stuff. So we've got a lot of B locals all around the country where B Corps can come together in specific regions, which is quite a sort of, I find that really exciting. I mean, I think the connection between business and place is one of the kind of fundamental kind of fractures that we've experienced as kind of capitalism has rolled into its late stage. And so that connection between business and place, I think, is something that we're really keen to facilitate at B Lab. But yeah, we'll also be looking more at how we do that on a sector basis. We're also going to be looking more at how we do that in a way that feeds into these requirements on collective action, so bringing B Corps together around issues as well. So there's a lot of work to do on that, but we're really open to kind of hearing ideas from B Corps as well, because I think ultimately, however much we do at B Lab, a lot of it will be self-organization on B Corps' part. Like, how can they come together? How can they find peers and other B Corps that are committed to the same kind of action as them? So, yeah, that's a flavor.
Thank you very much, and I'm afraid we're pretty much at time.
Yeah, no worries. All right, well, thank you so much to everybody. And thank you, panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Ladies and gents, we had Bronwen, Foster-Butler, we had Thomas Kolster, we had Lauren MacCallum, we had Chris Turner and Matt Barr. Thank you, guys and girls.